Hey, I'm Josh, and this is Beyond the Numbers. This is a podcast where we have real and raw conversations about what healthy ministry and healthy leaders should actually look like within our churches. Now, before we get into today's topic, I've got to be honest and put a little confession out there for you. I'm not good at today's topic. I'm learning, but I'm still not there yet. And for most of my life, when someone asked me, well, Josh, did you take a Sabbath this week? My answer would be, yes, I did. And I meant it. But if I'm honest, what I was calling rest was actually a day just to get my to-do list done. It was just wearing a different outfit. I'd take my day off and I'd spend it knocking out errands and catching up on emails and sometimes work texts and work emails that I told myself, I'm just going to look at just one more. Even family time was spent more running around doing the errands than actually spending time with the family. 5 different places, 5 different locations, 5 hours here, 5 hours here. And at the end of it, I would feel accomplished. I feel productive, but not rested. And here's the thing. I've had this conversation more than once with multiple pastors, multiple people, including my own spouse, because sometimes what we say is rest isn't actually rest. I'll look at my day off and we'll both say, hey, we can knock out a whole bunch of stuff around the house. Hey, we can get all this work done. We can do this stuff and keep busy. And while it's great to do all those things, and we know that there are errands and doctor's visits and all that kind of stuff, the truth is there is always something. But I've had to learn to say, even on a flex day, I need actual rest. It's not laziness, but rest. Because what I'm becoming more and more convinced of is that a lot of us within the ministry are not resting. We're just abusing the day differently than they did in the time that Jesus rebuked them for abusing it. So let's be honest about where we are right now. When I talk to a lot of pastors and ministry leaders, I hear something that you'll start to hear over and over again. The same sentence, maybe not exactly, but the same sentiment. I'm done. You know what? I think I'm just done with the ministry altogether. I'm spent. I'm broken. I don't have any more time. I feel overwhelmed. Yes, maybe you've heard those same exact quotes. Maybe you've heard something along those lines. And for many leaders, there's actually a legitimate grief and trauma behind those words. It's real seasons that they experience more than just needing a day off. And for those, we'll come back to that because I don't want to just breeze past it. But if we're honest, I think for a lot of us, maybe all of us, I don't think we're broken because the ministry is too hard or we're just too busy with work and there's too much overwhelming. I think we're broken because we've never actually let ourselves practice a rhythm of rest. Not, here's my day off and I'm going to fill it with chores and to-do lists and work and extra work, but an actual pause in the middle of the pace that we're trying to keep. Many years ago, I sat in a room with a well-known voice on the Sabbath. His name is Swoboda, and he was teaching a group of pastors and staff exactly that. Hundreds of pastors and staff and churches gathered together, and one of the things that he said in that meeting that has stuck with me ever since is for the pastor that says, I can't take a break because of my ministry. He said, if you are a leader and you cannot take a day off without your ministry falling apart, without really disconnecting, then you haven't built a ministry. You've built a fancy structure around yourself. And there's a problem with that. And the room got quiet for a second or two, and then they had us break into small groups, do a little huddle. And I remember at my table, we all kind of came in, and one of the staff pastors was like, that right there, that is some powerful material. And it's important for us to listen to that. But I want to make sure that when we leave this place, we don't say, well, I actually need my day off and I can't do work on my day off. Or hey, I worked a whole week. I really need a flex day. Or hey, I've done 40 and 50 hours. I think I need just a little bit of a day off, because the truth is the work doesn't stop for us. And what's crazy is in that moment, you heard all of those words, all of that discernment, and then you watched as it went out the window in the same second. Dismissed. In the same breath that conviction hit. But honestly, that's not so different from hearing Jesus say the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And then responding to him, that's great, I can't do it, Jesus. Because if we can say that about when Jesus commanded us to rest, what stops us from saying it about anything else? Any of the commands that God laid out for us. Hey, don't lie. Boom. Great teaching, great material there. I just got to do it all the time. So thank you, but no. Or like, don't covet. Wow. Now that's convicting. But I can't do that either. So I appreciate that. That's a great idea. It's just not meant for me. See, we don't talk about the Sabbath like it's a command. We talk about it like it's a suggestion for others that have more of a margin and more time than we do. So let's go to what God actually says, because I think when it comes to this, we've got this pictured as two totally different errors, when really it's the same sin, just wearing two different faces. By the time that Jesus is walking around Israel, the religious leaders had taken God's gift of the Sabbath and had buried it under so many rules that the people were afraid of like blinking their eyes wrong on a Saturday. It had stopped being a gift and had become a burden. A burden that like no one could actually carry. And that's why when we get to Mark chapter 2, Jesus addresses them plainly. And he says this in Mark chapter 2, starting in verse 23. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and his disciples walked along. They began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" He answered, "Have you never read what David did when him and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for the priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. Then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." You have Jesus plainly laying out that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. I mean, it was never supposed to crush you. It was meant to hold you. But here's what I don't think that we're saying enough of. Because just because we're on the opposite side of the mistake where they abused the Sabbath by adding to it until like nobody could breathe, I think we abuse it by ignoring it until we can't breathe either. Same sin, different direction. You go all the way back to Genesis chapter 2, before there was a law, before there was a Sabbath, but there was a pattern. God created everything and called it good. But then what did he do on the seventh day? He rested. Now, did he rest because he was just really exhausted? Man, I'm pooped. I just created everything. Did God really need the rest? Was he that tired? No. But he was building that rhythm and setting that example, so that rest was part of the design from the very beginning. So much so that it's like woven into creation itself. Before sin, before law, before any of us were around to abuse it in either direction, it was there, setting the example. And then you have Jesus, probably one of the most busiest people, most on demand to ever have lived. And yet he still modeled this. You look in Mark chapter 1 and Luke chapter 5, and both tell us that Jesus would withdraw from the crowds to be alone and pray. I mean, he had crowds forming. There were always people that needed healing. The disciples probably needed his every step direction. Where do you want me to go? What do you want me to do? Huh? What? Like, he was someone with such a time crunch, and yet he still stepped away. And if Jesus needed to withdraw, what makes us think that we're the exception? I love a good book. And there was a book that was recommended on another podcast called The Ministry Coach, which was really great. I got to do an interview with Kristen Lascola. I'll link it wherever those things are. But on their podcast, they mentioned a great book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. And I read it, and some of what he talked about has stuck with me about the Sabbath. And one of those things in particular is when he lays out the Sabbath, he says that the Sabbath was never meant to be this thing that we like are revving our engine and going full bore throughout the entire week. And then we hit our Sabbath and we hit like the emergency brake and everything comes to a crashing halt. He said it's not meant to be a reset button. It's meant to be something that everything else that we do builds towards. Not something that we have to take, but something that we get to take and plan for. Jumping back to that speaker at that conference that I talked about before, AJ Swoboda, he has a book called The Subversive Sabbath. And in it, he makes a very similar point. If you can't get away without everything collapsing around you, that's not a scheduling problem, that's a heart problem. And sometimes it's an idol. Now, if you're hearing this and you're a leader who is genuinely burned to nothing, I don't just want to hand you a guilt trip about your day off and not taking it and be like, there you go, do better. Some of you aren't tired just because you skipped the Sabbath. You're tired because you've walked through real loss, conflict, and trauma within the ministry that a day in the park is not going to fix by itself. And that is real. And it deserves more care than just a sermon, a how-to book, or some podcaster telling you what to do. And if that's you, please hear me. You need to pursue healing. You need to get around people who can actually help you carry the weight that you are going through. A day of rest matters, but it's not a substitute for true healing. But for a lot of us, maybe most of us, the exhaustion that we feel, the strain and the anxiety that we are going through, it isn't from trauma. It's from never practicing the rhythm in the first place. And that's the part that we actually have power over, power to change this week. But it starts with a choice. Choosing to say, everything I have planned for that day off will be revolving around rest and rejuvenation. So here's where I've had to get practical in my own life. I've had to actually sit there and define what real rest looks like for me. Because day off and rest are not automatically the same words with the same definition. And so for me, rest looks like quality family time. Spending time in God's creation and nature, having fun days, sitting with a puzzle. I know I'm an old man, but I enjoy a puzzle. Sitting with some paint and paintbrushes, doing different tasks, teaching things to my daughters that are joyful, different hobbies that they enjoy, that I enjoy, and doing it all without worrying what the output is. Not making everything like a check off list, not multitasking through my day off, not relaxing, but actually being present and being rejuvenated. That's not laziness. And I've had to battle with that feeling. But laziness is avoiding what God is calling you to do. Sabbath is trusting God enough to know that you can stop for a day and fully believe that He will hold what you can't carry for 24 hours. So here's my question to you. And if we're honest, as I said, I'm not an expert at this. I'm still walking through this and learning this. But it's a question that I've had to ask myself. Are you actually pursuing rest? Or are you abusing Sabbath, maybe in a different direction than the Pharisees, but you're still just as guilty? We're just less obvious about it. If you've got a day off this week where you know you're just going to have to run errands and then call it a rest, I challenge you to actually stop. Breathe. Enjoy what God has made. Let that fun, that laughter be worship to Him, instead of just one more thing that we have on our list of checkoffs. Now, if this episode stirred something within you, maybe you realize that there are changes that you have to make. Maybe you have Sabbath down packed and there's nothing wrong with it. You actually have such great rhythms in your life. I would love to hear that, and I'm sure others would too. Post it in the comments so that we can glean some of that wisdom, or maybe something that you took away from this episode. But if this episode has hit home in any area, share it with other leaders who need to hear this. And if you're new here, or you come on a weekly basis and you've never clicked that subscribe button, that follow button, do that so that you don't miss any other parts of these conversations that I think, honestly, as leaders and as churches, we need to have as we pursue something that is more Christ-like and less like the world. Until next week, I'm Josh, and this is Beyond the Numbers. Stop, enjoy a break, pause yourself, and breathe. I'll see you in the comments, and I'll see you next week.